In terms of inflation, when you look at energy, when you look at food prices, you rightly pointed out too, they're at elevated levels. Does it get worse from here? Can we start to see a peak? When do you expect things to peak out?
I think it gets better from here if you're looking at things on a period-on-period measure. At the EIU, we think most commodity prices, both softs and hards, are going to peak in the second quarter of this year, so roughly where we are now. Of course, the picture does differ commodity by commodity, and then prices will start to soften for most commodities through the second half of the year. I mean, this is really as the disruption from Russian and Ukrainian supplies coming off the market starts to work through. It takes time for mines and crops and supply chains to adjust, but they are adjusting slowly. So I think prices are going to begin to soften. Now, we have to pay a lot of attention to the numbers that we look at, because year on year, inflation is going to remain high. I mean, really up until February next year, when until the Ukraine war kind of spike in prices gets out of the year-on-year comparison. But if we look at the month-on-month or the quarter-on-quarter, I think those rates will start to come down over the next 3-4 months. So this again will make it tough for central banks, because the numbers that are reported in the media and in much policy discussion are year-on-year numbers, and then we have some ridiculousness like in the US and multiplying them by 4 to annualize them. And so then people are going to be hearing very high year-on-year numbers. Central banks will be observing commodity prices beginning to soften. So that's going to further complicate the expectations management.
Simon, even if the war in Ukraine ends, is it naive to think that the supply issues will be eased quickly, given the fact that the sanctions, or at least some of the sanctions, might still remain?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right there, Mandy. Even if the war ending is not the trigger for commodity markets to go back to where they were. For sanctions to come off Russia, I think one of two things would need to happen, and in practice they probably happen at the same time if they were to happen, and that is Ukraine giving the go-ahead for sanctions to come off Russia, meaning they have a settlement they're happy with. The other thing I think that is required would be for Putin to no longer be president of Russia. It's going to be very hard, I think, for sanctions to come down while he remains in power, for reasons to do with how he will approach it and reasons to do with how the US and Europe will approach it. So, yeah, I think sanctions are here for a long time. We're seeing a longer-term adjustment in supply chains, and this is just another reason why invading Ukraine was such a shoot-yourself-in-the-foot move by Russia, because supply chains will readjust, new commodity sources will come online, and that's going to really dent Russian living standards for decades in the medium term. On the other hand, in Asia, there is some medium-term bright spots to look at. So places like Australia, Indonesia, Malaysia actually are probably going to find themselves in with higher market share in a lot of soft and hard commodity markets as a result of the realignment.